My family went to Costa Rica without telling me. I found out because my younger sister, Maya, posted a picture of herself stretched across a hammock beside a white sand beach, holding a coconut toward the camera, like she had escaped some unbearable life. Beneath it, she wrote, "Tropical reset with real family." Those last two words lodged inside my chest. Real family. I was 7 months pregnant when I read them, sitting at the kitchen table while my boyfriend Daniel stood across from me sorting ribbons and decorations we no longer needed. The baby shower we had spent weeks planning had happened the previous afternoon, and almost every relative who promised to help had mysteriously vanished. Mom had promised to bring the cake. Aunt Teresa was supposed to handle the drinks. Maya had sworn she would arrive early and help Daniel decorate the rented hall. Instead, none of them showed. No cancellation, no warning, no emergency call, nothing. Daniel and I spent half the afternoon rearranging tables so the empty seats wouldn't look quite as obvious, while friends kept asking whether my family was running late. I smiled so much my cheeks hurt, pretending their absence didn't humiliate me, until Maya's post appeared. I had been inventing excuses for them. Maybe Mom was sick. Maybe Dad had some emergency. Maybe Maya's car broke down and everyone had gone to help her. I had always been good at explaining away the things my family did to me. It was practically a survival skill. But then I scrolled through Maya's Facebook page and saw another photograph. Dad standing beside a pool. Mom wearing sunglasses beneath a palm tree. Aunt Teresa raising a cocktail toward the camera. Two cousins grinning behind them. They had not missed my baby shower because something happened. They had boarded a plane the night before and deliberately left the country. Daniel read the caption over my shoulder and went completely still. "Do you want me to say something?" he asked. I locked my phone. "No." He studied my face. "Claire, not yet." I wasn't ready to fight. I wasn't even sure what emotion I was supposed to feel first. 3 days later, Maya made that decision for me. I was folding newborn clothes in our bedroom when my phone buzzed. The message was from her. No greeting. No apology for disappearing. Just one sentence. "She still hasn't noticed the villa went on her card." I stared at it for several seconds before understanding what I was reading. Then another message appeared almost immediately. "Claire, ignore that. Wrong person." My stomach dropped. I opened my banking app with shaking hands and searched through recent transactions. There it was, Playa Verde Villas, $4,680, $2.74. For a moment the room seemed to tilt. Daniel came through the doorway carrying a laundry basket and stopped when he saw me sitting motionless on the edge of the bed. "What happened?" I handed him the phone. Months earlier, Mom had called saying her banking app wasn't working while she was trying to order a space heater. I had given her one of my card numbers and told her to remove it afterward. She promised she would. Apparently, she had kept it. Suddenly, the entire trip looked different. My family hadn't simply abandoned my baby shower for a tropical vacation. They had financed part of that vacation with my money. They skipped the celebration for my unborn daughter, charged almost $5,000 to my account without permission, and then laughed privately about whether I would notice. Something inside me became strangely calm. Maya sent another message. "Seriously, Claire, that wasn't meant for you." I typed only 2 words back. "Time's up." Then I froze the card. Daniel sat beside me watching quietly. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Something I should have done a long time ago. I called the bank, disputed the charge, and reported unauthorized use. After that, I found the villa company listed on the transaction and emailed them directly. I attached screenshots of Maya's message, confirmation of the charge, and a clear statement that I had never authorized anyone in Costa Rica to use my card. I expected delays in paperwork. Instead, the rental company replied before dinner. They asked whether I was staying at the property. No. Had I made the reservation? No. Had I given anyone permission to use my card? No. Their representative said they would investigate immediately. At 7:44 the following morning, an automated email appeared in my inbox. Access to the property had been suspended while payment authorization was reviewed. 20 minutes later, the family group chat exploded. Maya wrote first. Why doesn't the door work? Then Aunt Teresa. Our belongings are inside. Mom. Claire, answer your phone immediately. My cousin. This isn't funny. I sat at the breakfast table eating toast while my phone vibrated continuously beside my coffee. Daniel came downstairs, glanced at the screen, and raised an eyebrow. Them? I nodded. Apparently, the tropical reset has developed complications. By noon, I had 38 missed calls and dozens of messages. Confusion turned to accusations almost instantly. Apparently, their electronic keys had stopped working, while most of their luggage remained inside the villa. Even better, tropical rain had started pouring. One cousin sent a photograph to the family chat, probably hoping guilt would soften me. They were standing beneath a narrow awning in sandals and beach clothes while rain hammered the pavement. Through the glass behind them, their suitcases were visible inside. I called the rental company to make sure nobody could talk their way around the fraud report. The representative explained that belongings could be retrieved through a supervised process once the payment issue was addressed. They weren't actually trapped or abandoned. They were simply being forced to deal with the consequences of using someone else's card. That distinction mattered. Mom eventually sent me a message so long I had to scroll several times. She said they were frightened and humiliated in a foreign country. She said she barely recognized me anymore. Then she aimed exactly where she knew it would hurt. When your daughter is born, you'll finally understand how important family is. I read that sentence twice before answering, you first. Maya tried another tactic. According to her, Daniel was controlling me. This isn't you, she wrote. He's turning you against everyone. For a second, the accusation landed because my family had spent years teaching me that disagreement was betrayal. Then Daniel opened our banking history and quietly started showing me old transactions. $200 for Maya before payday, $500 for Dad's car repair, $800 for Mom's utilities, $1,800 because my parents were behind on rent. Individually, I had labeled each payment an emergency. Together, they formed a pattern I had spent years refusing to see. That evening, Daniel placed my wallet on the table. How many cards have they had access to? I hesitated. Mom had the one I had just frozen. Maya still had an emergency card I gave her 2 years earlier. I had also co-signed a balance transfer account for Dad. Daniel stared at me for a moment, then said gently, Claire, these aren't emergency arrangements anymore. They've become part of their income. We shut everything down. Every card, every authorization, every account access I could revoke. Before going upstairs, I sent one final message into the family chat. Hope the real family can figure out the rest of the trip. Then I left the chat and blocked everyone. The silence afterward felt unnatural, almost frightening. But underneath that fear was something else: relief. They came home 5 days earlier than planned. 2 days after their return, the doorbell rang while Daniel and I were assembling the crib. Through the window, I saw Mom, Dad, and Maya standing on the porch. Aunt Teresa and one of my cousins waited beside the car with their arms crossed. Daniel looked at me. You don't have to open it. I know. I opened the door anyway. Mom walked straight inside without being invited. We need to talk. Maya followed her. You locked us out in another country. Do you understand how dangerous that was? I looked at her. You used my credit card. We borrowed it, she snapped. That was the moment everything finally became clear. They genuinely believed that because I had money, they were entitled to take it. Mom crossed her arms. Stop pretending you're poor, Claire. You have a house. You have a stable job. Daniel works. You weren't going to miss that money. Before I could answer, Daniel walked in carrying several printed pages. He placed them on the coffee table. 4 years of transfers, bills, loans, and unpaid promises. Total, more than $5,000. Mom stared down at it. What is this? What you owe Claire, Daniel said. Maya laughed. You're keeping score now? Mom looked at my pregnant stomach and lowered her voice. You're about to become a mother. Think very carefully about whether you want your daughter growing up without grandparents. The threat was disguised as concern, but this time I heard it clearly. I want my daughter growing up around people who don't steal from her. The shouting started immediately. Maya accused Daniel of poisoning me against them. Mom blamed pregnancy hormones. Aunt Teresa shouted from outside that I was destroying the family over money. Dad remained almost completely silent. Daniel finally lifted his phone. You need to leave. Mom glared at him. This is our daughter's house. No, I said quietly. It's mine. That small sentence silenced everyone. They left furious, slamming the door hard enough to shake the pictures in the hallway. Dad lingered for a few seconds. I didn't know they used your card until we arrived, he said. I looked at him. But you stayed. He had no answer. That night, after dinner, I opened my laptop and filled out the small claims paperwork. I entered $5,000. I didn't desperately need the money. I needed something more important. Proof that stealing from me finally had consequences. The next morning, Aunt Teresa texted, You're taking this too far. I replied with the case number, put my phone face down, and went back to building my daughter's crib. For the first time in my life, my family wasn't deciding what happened next. I was. They didn't show up to court. Not late, not confused about the date, not asking for a continuance, just absent. I sat alone on a hard wooden bench beneath fluorescent lights while the clerk called our case number twice, and when no one answered from the other side of the room, the judge looked down at the documents I had submitted. Bank statements, transfers, messages, the unauthorized villa charge. The record was embarrassingly straightforward. I had spent the night before imagining some dramatic confrontation. Maya crying, Mom accusing Daniel of controlling me, Dad pretending he had known nothing. Instead, there was silence. The judge asked me a few questions, glanced at the empty seats where my family should have been, and signed the default judgment. $5,000 plus court costs. It took less than 5 minutes. I walked outside with the ruling in my hand and expected to feel victorious. I didn't. I felt strangely weightless, as if someone had finally removed a backpack I had been carrying so long I had forgotten it was there. When I got home, Daniel was waiting in the kitchen with a black picture frame. I laughed because I thought he was joking, but he held it out to me seriously. Frame it. I stared at him. Daniel, I'm not hanging a court judgment like a college diploma. Why not? He asked. It's the first piece of paper proving you finally chose yourself. Then he corrected himself, glancing toward my stomach. Actually, you chose us. That landed harder than I expected. We hung it outside my home office, not as some trophy celebrating what I had done to my parents, but as a reminder of what I had finally stopped allowing them to do to me. For years, every boundary I tried to establish had dissolved under pressure. One tearful call from Mom, one crisis from Maya, one disappointed sigh from Dad, and I would surrender. This one had held. My family didn't call after the judgment. Instead, they performed their anger publicly. Maya posted a selfie with an iced coffee and the caption, Some people teach you exactly who you never want to become. Aunt Teresa shared a blurry photograph outside a church with something about healing, forgiveness, and painful lessons. My cousin eventually uploaded an entire Costa Rica photo album weeks after the trip, carefully selecting pictures that made it look like nothing disastrous had happened. No locked villa, no rain, no desperate airport changes. Just beaches, cocktails, sunsets, and smiling faces. It would have bothered me once. Now it only seemed exhausting. They were spending so much energy controlling the story because they could no longer control me. Dad's birthday arrived the following month. In my family, his birthday had always been treated like a national holiday. Ribs on the grill, cheap plastic tablecloths, too much beer, Mom carrying out the cake while everyone sang badly. I had never missed one. This year, Daniel and I rented a small cabin 2 hours away beside a lake. There was no agenda, no guilt. We ate Thai takeout from paper containers on the porch and listened to boats humming somewhere beyond the fog. At one point, Daniel rested his hand over mine and said, "Notice anything?" "What?" "Your phone hasn't rung all day." I looked down at it. He was right. I posted one photograph of the lake with the caption, "We're good." 2 hours later, Maya posted a family picture from Dad's backyard. Everyone was smiling too hard. Dad stood in the back holding a drink. Mom wasn't visible anywhere. Nobody mentioned me. Nobody had to. The next morning, our neighbor caught me carrying the recycling bins back toward the garage. "Your parents were around this weekend," she said casually. I stopped. "Here?" She nodded. "Drove past twice. Slow. I figured maybe they were checking whether you were home." I thanked her and didn't ask anything else. But the drive-bys continued. Once in the morning, sometimes after dark, always slow enough that I could recognize the car, never slow enough that they actually stopped. They didn't call or knock. They just circled the house as though waiting for me to weaken. A week later, an envelope appeared in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a typed letter. It said families fought, that what I was doing wasn't love but punishment, that they had forgiven me when I had been difficult, and now it was my turn to forgive them. The final sentence said, "It's time to come home." I stood over the kitchen trash and tore the letter into 4 pieces. Home, I realized, was exactly where I already was. By mid-October, the judgment remained unpaid. Winning in court had been easy. Collecting was another problem. My parents seemed convinced that if they ignored the ruling long enough, it would evaporate. So I researched enforcement options and discovered that Mom's part-time wages at the dental office could be garnished. I filed the paperwork. A few weeks later, the first payment landed. $217.45. That tiny deposit triggered more rage than the entire lawsuit. Mom didn't call me. She went to Facebook. "Unbelievable what some people will do to their own mother," she wrote, followed by a broken heart emoji. Friends I hadn't heard from in years filled the comments with sympathy. "Stay strong. Family is everything. Praying for healing." Mom responded to nearly everyone as if she had survived some terrible betrayal instead of losing a court case she refused to attend. I didn't comment. I sent her a certified letter documenting the garnishment and remaining balance. Maya showed up at my workplace 3 days later. I saw her through the lobby glass wearing sunglasses and carrying an expensive coffee like she was meeting me for brunch instead of confronting me over a judgment. "You need to stop," she said before I had even reached her. "I'm working." "You're taking money out of Mom's paycheck." "The court is. Because of you." Her voice climbed with every sentence. She told me Mom had taken out a payday loan because the garnishment left her short on rent. Apparently that was supposed to make me feel responsible. Then she shouldn't have spent nearly $5,000 of someone else's money on a villa, I said. Maya called me cold. She said Daniel had turned me into someone she didn't recognize. When she started shouting loudly enough that people from nearby offices were looking through the glass, security escorted her out. My manager passed me afterward, gave me a sympathetic shrug and said nothing. I appreciated that more than he knew. That evening, Daniel had our financial records spread across the dining table. "There's more," he said. He had found forgotten payments that weren't included in the first claim. An electric bill I covered 3 winters earlier, money I had lent a cousin for a supposed emergency, several small transfers I had completely forgotten. Around $1,200 altogether. I felt tired just looking at the list. "I don't want another lawsuit," I said. Daniel nodded. "Then don't file one. But don't forget what this was." He pointed to the pages. "They would have continued until you had nothing left they could use." I understood. The goal wasn't revenge. It was making sure the door could never quietly reopen. I did take one additional legal step connected to an asset of Dad's, enough to make it clear that ignoring the judgment wouldn't work forever. That seemed to finally break something in them. The messages stopped. The cars stopped appearing outside our house. Maya stopped sending friends to ask what was happening. Even the anonymous letters vanished. Thanksgiving arrived, and instead of spending the day monitoring everyone's moods at my parents' table, Daniel and I celebrated with friends. There were no arguments about who owed whom money. Nobody asked me to transfer cash between dinner and dessert. People ate too much, laughed loudly, packed leftovers, and went home. That night, I slept without waking once. Christmas passed the same way. Silence from my parents. No card. No call. No manipulative message, pretending nothing had happened. The absence felt strange, but no longer painful. Then, 1 week before New Year's Eve, my daughter arrived. She was tiny, furious, loud, and absolutely perfect. Daniel cried the first time he held her. I did too, although I blamed exhaustion. In the hospital room, while she slept against my chest, I looked down at her fingers, curled around mine, and thought about the sentence Mom had sent me from Costa Rica. When your daughter is born, you'll understand how important family is. She had been right, just not in the way she expected. Looking at my daughter made everything clearer. I suddenly understood how insane it was to call manipulation love simply because the people doing it shared my blood. I kissed my daughter's forehead and made myself a promise. She would never grow up believing that being useful was the price of belonging. We brought her home on a gray winter morning, and the house immediately felt different. It was no longer just the place Daniel and I had protected from my relatives. It was the beginning of something completely separate from them. When Daniel posted the birth announcement, friends filled the comments with congratulations. Flowers arrived, diapers, tiny blankets, homemade food. My family said nothing. 2 days later, Aunt Teresa posted a photograph of a candle beside a Bible. Maya commented beneath it. She didn't even tell us. Another relative replied that it was heartbreaking when families fell apart. Daniel showed me the post and asked, "Want to say anything?" I looked at our daughter sleeping against his chest and shook my head. No, because for the first time, their version of the story no longer required my correction. They could tell themselves whatever they needed. I had stopped fighting to be understood by people who benefited from misunderstanding me. By February, Mom's wage garnishment had entered its third cycle. I checked the separate account where the payments were being deposited and found just under $700 sitting there. It wasn't much compared with what they had taken from me over the years, and at the rate the deductions were coming in, I knew it would take a long time before the judgment was fully satisfied. But somewhere along the way, the money itself had stopped being the point. What mattered was that every 2 weeks, reality reached into Mom's paycheck and reminded her that ignoring me no longer erased consequences. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to argue, defend myself, or convince anyone that what they had done was wrong. The court order did that for me. The strangest part was that my family had finally stopped contacting me completely. No drive-bys, no anonymous letters, no surprise visits. No relatives suddenly appearing in my inbox pretending they only wanted to hear both sides. I didn't know whether they had accepted the situation or were simply too embarrassed to keep fighting, but either way the silence felt like oxygen. Daniel and I slowly settled into life with our daughter. Sleepless nights became predictable instead of terrifying. Bottles accumulated on the kitchen counter. Tiny socks appeared in places that made absolutely no sense. The framed judgment still hung outside my office, but I began walking past it without really noticing. That surprised me. For months, it had represented this enormous war in my life. Now it was becoming background decoration. Our daughter had made everything else feel smaller. Every morning, Daniel would carry her downstairs while I made coffee, and sometimes I would catch myself staring at them together, the man who had stood beside me, while my entire family tried to convince me I was cruel, holding the tiny person I had promised to protect from the same kind of manipulation. Those quiet moments mattered more than any victory in court ever could. In April, we decided to take our first trip as a family. Arizona. I nearly canceled twice because traveling with a baby sounded like voluntarily signing up for chaos. But Daniel insisted we needed to prove to ourselves that becoming parents didn't mean life had ended. He was right. The airport was a disaster. We misplaced a pacifier before security, discovered formula leaking inside the diaper bag, and spent most of takeoff trying to calm our daughter, while people around us pretended not to stare. Yet somehow, none of it bothered me. It was messy, exhausting, and entirely ours. There was no phone ringing with someone else's emergency. No parent demanding money while I was trying to enjoy myself. No sibling criticizing where we stayed or how much we spent. For once, every problem in front of me belonged to the life I had chosen. One afternoon in Sedona, Daniel held our daughter while I sat on a bench, looking out at the red cliffs glowing beneath the afternoon sun. I took a picture of her tiny feet against the landscape and posted it without thinking much about it. A few hours later, Maya posted her own photograph. Hiking boots stretched towards some local trail. Her caption read, "Some of us hike toward peace. Some people just run from guilt." I stared at it for about 3 seconds before laughing so loudly, Daniel looked over at me. "What?" he asked. I showed him. He shook his head. "She's still doing this?" "Apparently." "Jajan, fine." I put my phone away. A year earlier, something like that would have ruined my afternoon. I would have spent hours composing responses in my head, trying to prove I wasn't guilty of anything. This time, I went back to watching the sunset. That was when I realized the distance had finally done what arguments never could. My family still watched me. They still talked about me. They still needed me to be the villain because admitting what really happened would require them to look at themselves. But they no longer reached me. Their anger existed somewhere outside the life Daniel and I were building. When we returned from Arizona, the house felt brighter than I remembered. Sunlight crossed the living room floor while our daughter rolled beneath her play gym, and I thought about how different the room had felt when Mom and Maya stood there screaming at me months earlier. Back then, the house had felt like a fortress. Now it simply felt like home. Spring became early summer, without anything dramatic happening. Daniel returned to his normal work schedule. I gradually returned to mine part-time. Our daughter somehow developed a nap routine that felt like winning the lottery. Weeks passed without disasters. No manufactured family emergencies. No requests for $300 until Friday. No warnings that someone's electricity was about to be shut off. No calls saying I was selfish because I couldn't fix whatever problem they had created that month. At first, the calm made me nervous. I kept waiting for something to happen. Eventually, I stopped waiting. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived. There was no return address, no company logo on the outside, just my name written slightly crooked across the front. I assumed it was junk mail and opened it while standing beside the recycling bin. Inside was a check. I almost dropped it when I saw the amount, $5,000. It had been issued through a local law firm. Attached to it was a yellow sticky note with 4 words written across it in rushed handwriting. "We're square. Stay gone." I read it once, then again. Daniel came into the kitchen carrying our daughter and immediately noticed my expression. "What happened?" I handed him the check. At first, we assumed it had to be fake. I called the law firm directly using a number I found independently and confirmed the payment was legitimate. The money had been arranged on behalf of someone connected to my family. I recognized the name attached to the account as an old friend of my uncle's, someone my parents had borrowed from before. Apparently, they had finally decided that paying the judgment outright was preferable to continuing the garnishment and enforcement process. Daniel stared at the sticky note. "So, that's it?" he asked. "They finally gave up?" I looked at those 4 words again. Not exactly. It wasn't an apology. There was no acknowledgement of the stolen card, the ruined baby shower, the years of unpaid loans, or the way they had tried to turn everyone against me. They weren't paying because they suddenly understood. They were paying because they wanted the pressure to stop. Maybe the garnishment embarrassed Mom at work. Maybe Dad was tired of worrying about what asset I might pursue next. Maybe someone finally told them I wasn't bluffing. Whatever the reason, they had discovered something about me that frightened them more than anger ever had. I was willing to follow through. The version of Claire they understood would eventually feel guilty and surrender. That woman was gone. I deposited the check. A week later, Daniel and I used part of the money to book a fall trip for the three of us, a quiet cabin surrounded by trees, hiking trails behind the property, barely any cell service. It felt strangely appropriate. The money my family had once treated as theirs would now pay for memories they would never control. Before throwing away the sticky note, I turned it over and wrote one sentence beneath their message. Silence isn't surrender. Then, for reasons I couldn't entirely explain, I placed it inside the drawer beneath the framed court judgment. Months earlier, I would have imagined this story ending with reconciliation. Mom crying on my porch, Maya apologizing, Dad finally admitting he should have stopped everything sooner. Maybe some dramatic family dinner where everyone promised to change. That ending never came, and I'm grateful now that it didn't. Some relationships don't end because everybody reaches understanding. Sometimes they end because one person finally stops carrying all the weight. My parents still have Maya, Aunt Teresa, my cousins, and everyone else who stayed inside that exhausting circle of blame, gossip, emergencies, and borrowed money. Maybe they're happy there. Maybe they still tell people Daniel stole me away from them. Maybe I'm still the selfish daughter in every version of the story they repeat. But when I look at Daniel cooking dinner while our daughter laughs from her high chair, I don't feel like someone who lost a family. I feel like someone who finally understood what one was supposed to be. My daughter will grow up knowing that generosity is something you choose, not something people are entitled to take from you. She'll know that love doesn't require surrendering your bank account, your boundaries, or your dignity. And if she ever sees that framed judgment outside my office and asks why I kept it, I'll tell her the truth. It wasn't there because I won $5,000. It was there because it marked the moment I stopped confusing being needed with being loved. My family said I abandoned them. I didn't. I simply stopped being the foundation they expected to stand on while they tore pieces out of me. And once I stepped away, I discovered something I should have learned years earlier. I wasn't leaving my family behind. I was finally building one of my own.